Hey everyone, welcome to Global Code. Ready for tech that reflects the global world? We go beyond the buzzwords to explore real world tech solutions for and with everybody, everywhere in the age of AI. Join us as we engage with leading experts to explore how economic growth, inclusive data, sustainability, and community trust can open doors to product innovation and drive the ethical evolution of technology. I'm your host, Dr. Salima Bimani, Maven of Moonshots, and here are my hosts, Dr. Shadan Delaveau, G-Force of Talent, and Ashish Pujari, the Master of Engineers. I'm going to pass it over to Shadan today to introduce our guest.
Salima, thank you so much. I am honored to be able to introduce Dr. Neil Prasad today. Neil is an entrepreneur and professor with an international HR executive experience. He holds a doctorate in leadership and innovation from New York University and has dedicated his career to fostering effective leadership and organizational success. With extensive international experience in the USA and Asia Pacific, Dr. Neil Persaud has built a strong multicultural background and experience, enriching his perspective and enabling him to address diverse workplace dynamics effectively. Neil leverages this expertise to guide leaders to understand and meet their employees' needs and drive positive change. He also supports academic communities by helping adult students develop the growth mindset, which will make a difference in their professional lives. Neil, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you here. When Ashish and Shadan and I chatted, one of the things that we thought was really incredible about your background is this international experience that you have. And so we kind of wanted to start there with a little bit about you and how you've ended up being this traveler or sojourner, if you want to put it that way, of the world. How did this all happen?
Thank you, Salima, and thank you, Shadan and Ashish. I just want to say I'm really honored to be a part of the podcast today, and I'm looking forward to the chat as well. So the journey started actually with so I was born and raised in New York, and that's I think the genesis of being exposed to different cultures. When you're a young person growing up in the city, and I know for many of our viewers, they're from New York as well, and they've been exposed to different cultures, so they're acclimate to what I'm saying. You're exposed to all walks of life, different people, different cultures, and for many people, that's a form of excitement, curiosity, and that's been the case for me. So it started just from my upbringing, being exposed to different people and different cultures. And what was interesting was I worked for a global Fortune 500 company as an HR person. And that was my first real HR job. And I did that for a few years. And when I left, I joined a French startup in New York, and I was the head of HR for them. And we grew quite rapidly. We expanded across North America, and they came to me with a proposition of starting their HR function in Asia Pacific in a country called Singapore. Now, at that time, I was fairly young. I didn't know, to be honest, where Singapore was. So I said, well, hold on, let me check that. And it took me literally a few hours to say, yes, I will entertain that. And little did I know I was going to Singapore with this intent that it was going to be, an 18-month assignment to set up the HR infrastructure across Asia Pacific. And when I got there, I truly fell in love with the exposure to not only the personal cultures of people, but the working culture of the different countries across Asia Pacific. And that spanned from Singapore to India, China, Malaysia. And that was a real platform for me to go deeper in working with the different cultures. And that 18-month quickly turned into 15 years. People say, well, how did you end up spending 15 years in Asia? tell you that was probably the fastest 15 years of my life. Like it went by in a hurry, only because there was so much excitement and fun. Along the way, I met my my wife, and we started a family there. Um, and we just of course continue to develop ourselves and our network in Asia. But yeah, that's how it started.
That's amazing. And you, I mean, why HR? Like, why was HR the place where you wanted to have impact?
Yeah, that's also a great question. I I was exposed to different leaders early on in my career, and there were a couple of HR leaders. At the time, I was working for the Home Depot in a retail environment, um, and they were having a big impact on developing talent. And if you know the retail environment, you have many hourly positions, and these hourly positions are can be the gamut of people that are starting off in their careers, or people that have been there for many years and very deep in their experience. And I was exposed to a few really polished HR leaders at the Home Depot that had so much care and develop. And I was exposed to seeing how they were looking at fostering that talent for people. That really pushed me to pursue my degree in HR, take up internships in HR, and just ultimately grow in the field of HR for the sole purpose of, yes, you're often in a position of power, but that was never a driver for me. That was, in fact, one of the downsides of being in HR for me was like, oh, you got to be exposed to the possibility of terminating people, control of compensation, and so forth. But really, what was the driver was the fact that I would have an opportunity to help people develop in their careers. And that ultimately prompted me to go deeper in HR. And it's always been a passion of mine of how do we continue to help individuals grow from their professional development side.
I love this discussion just around talent and being really people centric and being proactive about thinking about how to help people to grow in their careers. I'm really curious about how you went about just developing your lens for talent. And when I think about, as you mentioned, just growing up in New York and being from New York and relocated to this place you never heard of, Singapore and things like that. And now having this whole new experience in Asia, how did you go about that process of just shifting your lens, expanding your aperture, all of those things to be able to see talent a bit more broadly?
Yeah, it's a great question, Shadon. Um, I will start with, as you brought it back to New York, uh, the pace of New York is relentless. When you're growing up there, when you're going to school there, when you're holding multiple jobs, it is nonstop. And with that comes this ability, or not even ability, I would say the demand to adapt at a very quick pace. Um, I remember working part time while going to college, and then switching, working full time, and then finishing my bachelor's degree. And this, I would say, the pace forces you to adapt very quickly to your situation. And it translates for me in this ability to look at talent from a perspective of uh, the individual, or the person's capabilities for that particular situation. And being able to view people and talent as individuals as opposed to a blanket component. And when you are looking at talent per se, I think it's important that you are adapting to that individual's current circumstances, what those individuals are going through, what their aspirations are, and what their goals are. And I want to add that I've been truly blessed to work with some really great operators, CEOs, managing directors who have had that same passion as me for developing people and understanding that talent is really the driving force behind what keeps a business going and growing. But I think, Shadon, to answer again your question, it's really around how well you can adapt to the situation of, for example, talent development and understanding talent from a broad perspective. The same holds true when you're in I would say, multicultural international environment as well. Um, Having this one size fit all approach doesn't work, I think, when you're looking at the lens of talent development.
No, that's super insightful, and couldn't agree more that one size fits all approach doesn't work when you think about the diversity of kind of the global talent landscape. Um, just following up on this just a little bit, I imagine that this is also somehow connected to your entrepreneurial endeavors. So you moved to Singapore for a company, but along the way you became an entrepreneur and launched, a pretty amazing company. So do you mind taking us on that journey a little bit for the listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I shared, I had the unique experience of moving with a company, starting an HR function from scratch. But along the way, the exposure to different talented individuals was prominent, and that allowed me to obviously work with my current co-founder now in our previous company, but to also experiment with him on different strategies for talent development, for leadership development, for succession planning in our workplace at the time. And those experiments, trials and errors, some worked, some didn't. And we were together in that situation for over a decade. And that gave us the opportunity when we exited that startup to think together about how we could continue to work together, but create an organization that would be focused on our passions. And our passions were pretty much aligned around human development. I remember having, many whiteboard discussions at that time. And those were really fun days around, well, what are we going to start? We know we want to do something together, but what is it? And we had many, I want to say brainstorm sessions, but just conversations around people and talent and how organizations can thrive, and where were we ultimately going to put our resources in the form of our time, our network, our money, and see how we were going to enable people to thrive. And ultimately, we came up with the idea and the concept that individuals and talent for organizations are at the key and is at the heart of how you operate and do business. How do we continue to develop them? And that's ultimately how our organization Live More was started. We focused on the talents of an organization. How do we develop them from a personal and professional development side? And ultimately, we start working with leaders on leadership development and team effectiveness, which is really driving, I would say, our conversations and engagement with companies now based in Asia, Europe, and the US. So we're still at a unique size, which we're growing. But what I always tell people is that because of our global international experience, we're able to work with clients that are based in Asia, Europe, and the US, which covers quite a lot. I know there's a whole world outside of the three regions, but for our small organization, we're able to cater to those needs for those regions. So yeah, that's how it started, Shadon.
So Neil, as you mentioned, There is no one size fits all, right? But I'm curious, given the scope of clients that you have seen and the geographies that you have seen, and speaking from a perspective of the U.S. Here, we went through a phase of, you initially used to put your resume, then it was like all about LinkedIn, and when specifically talking about the tech sector here, uh, you know, it, before the tech sector, like you had to have a college degree. Then tech came in, and it was like you don't need to have a college degree uh, uh, to get many jobs in tech. And also, the trends such as rest and west and quiet quitting and quiet hiring. So, given all these things that are happening, do you see sort of those trends playing out in North America?
Absolutely. I think North America, for me, the US in particular, continues to lead on those trends. I think those trends tend to come out from the US, and then some of the other regions tend to follow what happens there. But the employee, I would say, landscape is changing so rapidly, particularly in the US. I had the privilege to uh, be on the board and support an organization in Hawaii for a few years, and just the challenges, and this was one of the largest employers in the state, the challenges that they faced with exactly what you're saying, Ashish, around um, quiet quitting, or even the war for talent. It is evident. And this is a nonprofit that had some components of tech, some components of social services, but that, as a microcosm, I use that as really how the landscape for employees and employee situations in the US is evolving very rapidly. And then talking to my counterparts in Asia as well, it's the very similar challenges that they face. I would say it's really a global challenge that many leaders and organizations are facing today in terms of dealing with the rapid landscape changing for employees. The trick
Can
is,
you?
how do you deal with that?
Yeah, for sure. And I appreciate what you're saying, Neil, because one of the things that we've seen is that the change and the change in the sort of talent landscape is also the result of the social environment in which we're in, which is that now, talent is not there to just serve a job, but in a lot of cases, at least in North America, this is definitely true and definitely in the US, we're seeing employees who want their companies to care about what's happening in the world. They want their companies to have a point of view on what's happening in the world. They want a company that stands for something that aligns with their own values. I think for the longest time, it was like, come into this company and be aligned with our values. And I think that especially younger talent is pushing up against that and saying, "No, no, and you need to align with our values as well." And so do you see some of that playing itself out on Asia? And if it is, like, what does it look like there? Because I think the contexts are different, and it's important to kind of, I think, distill where the differences and the similarities are.
Yeah, I'll speak, Salima, just briefly on the US side, and then I'll switch over to Asia. Um,
Yeah.
I think it's such a challenge of the employer trying to understand what they stand for sometimes, because the needs of the employee population is so diverse. And one example I would give you is for this nonprofit that I was supporting in Hawaii. Um, their employees uh, was very passionate about um, the way the organization should look and feel. So they were very passionate about DEI, um, and the organization was also passionate about it. But the pace at which the employees wanted to see demonstration of that versus what the organization was doing wasn't aligned. Their values ultimately was the same. They were there for the community. They were there for driving change. But what the employees desired in terms of the pace to demonstrate was very different. And that created a lot of frustrations and a lot of tension between, okay, are we here? Does the organization stand for what we want to do? They're not participating in this. They're not participating in that event. What does that mean? And that ultimately created a high level of turnover and dissatisfaction for that organization. And I would just touch on the social factors for some of the employees as well. The economy is changing so much. You have now, I think I read this article somewhere around the growing trend around the gig economy, which is employees now having 3 or 4, maybe even more side gigs. And employers need to understand how to cope with that, because employees are now monetizing on that, and that's part of their revenue. And I think gone are the days where you as an employer hire someone and say, yep, I'm going to pay you to do this job, and this is going to be your bread and butter. And you're going to be so-called loyal to me and produce at 100%. I think that's done. Now employees, I remember for this employer, that Hawaii in as itself, like the rest of the US, has a shortage for teachers, right? And they can't find them enough. And here they were providing preschool support. So to find people to do that was just impossible. And I remember working with the HR department on looking at strategies on hiring people to do this work. And the candidates we were speaking to was saying, I can't do it during these hours because I'm already tied up in this job and that job. But this wasn't like they were stressed working 4 or 5 jobs, right? They were having sideline gigs that were producing as much income as what would be their so-called main employer. So I think these social factors is something that the organizations need to continuously support and be aware of. If you're not, I think you're going to find yourself on the outside looking in. And just switching back over to Asia and my exposure there, I want to say it's similar, Salima, but I think it's not as prevalent as the US. I think in the US, my exposure to the employees is, as I said, they will have 3, 4 different gigs that they're working on that produces a substance of their monetary income. But in Asia, it isn't as prevalent. I think you'll have maybe 1 side gig, if that, but still the job is still the factor of it. That trend will obviously change over time, as it's starting to already happen. But I think the US is really leading the change there in that venture.
I really appreciate what you're saying, because what it reminds me of is, like, we used to always talk about the labor market. And I think what we're dealing with now is a talent market, and it's very different. Those are very different concepts on how you think about, people who come and work for you. It's kind of like when I was at Google and we used to talk about, and working with the other vet companies, we used to talk, people used to talk about, hey, we need to go and hire people to come and work for us, hire for jobs and roles. And that's very different from saying I'm hiring talent, because you have a different point of view on who those people are, what the skill sets that they bring. And to your point, like, what other factors in their life are going to influence, the contribution that they're going to make for you. But I wanted to shift gears just a little bit and kind of take us on this track, because this podcast is called Global Code. We wanted to really explore this intersection of technology and HR. And you, as an expert in this space, like, where do you see this intersection playing out, and how is it really changing the HR landscape? Let's start on the Asia side. Like, what are you seeing happening there?
I see HR tech evolving globally. In Asia, I see it as an opportunity for employers to stay to use platforms and technologies to stay connected to employees. There's so many different HR tech platforms out there, but in my conversations with different leaders, HR leaders, CEOs in Asia, they're constantly looking for platform and technologies that will enable them to connect and go deeper with their employees. And there, don't get me wrong, there's tons of tools out there that on paper could do the job. For example, you can say, well, create a Slack group for that or create a WhatsApp group for that. But I think we are going beyond that. We're getting to a point where the technology has to be meaningful and has to drive impact in the organization. And when I say meaningful, I think it has to serve a purpose beyond the blanket approach of, yep, you can communicate, you can send broadcast messages, you can do this. You talking to business leaders in Asia, you don't want to inundate organizations with features. And I think we are moving beyond like, hey, my platform or my technology can do this. I think the business leaders recognize now that there's a tool for everything and anything out there. What is the value add that this technology can have for my organization? How does it help us develop? How does it help us stay ahead of the game? And now I'm talking as an entrepreneur selling technology to different leaders in Asia. You have a short window with them, right? You need to get it right very quickly. Otherwise, there are so many different technology players out there. They move to the next or they talk to another provider. And then in the US, Salima, I would just switch over there. I think the US is at a stage currently where it's still it's very similar to Asia. Of course, there's so many different players, but I think there's still an opportunity in the US to explore with different technologies on what it could do. There's still an appetite for, hey, let's run a pilot with this group and see what happens. Whereas in Asia, it's a little bit more guarded, where you introduce a technology. They want to be able to demonstrate to the employees that this isn't a pilot. This is something that we've vetted for you. We validated, and it's going to add value to our organization. So let's run with it. And again, versus the US, and this is again, from my personal experience, I think there is more of an appetite to explore with technology and talent and see what works, what doesn't work.
I'm curious how you, as a co-founder, as a CEO of a technology company, and with a distributed global workforce, are balancing all of these factors. When you think about technology, and as you said, organizations, one, trying to use it to keep people connected. As we talked about, people really engaging in this gig economy, and I think part of the reason that people are able to have 3 and 4 additional jobs are because of advances in technology that now allow you to do so many jobs from the home. So if you have your laptop open, all right, now you're able to, have an online business in addition to your, TikTok influencer business, in addition to your et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So as a person who's managing a company and has created a company, how are you balancing all of these things in addition to considering the pace and increase of the innovation of technology? So when we think of things like generative AI and machine learning and all those things that are actually accelerating the pace of innovation, how are you thinking about all of these, the intersection of all of these things?
Yeah, that's a big question, Shadon, and it's one that is a tough one to crack. I think the best way we try to handle all of those changes is honestly looking at it from the people side. So from the the leadership of an organization, ultimately, what do they want from a technology? And from our standpoint, we always ask to speak to employees in the organization, because oftentimes we find that organizations have an expectation of what they want from a certain tool or technology, and they haven't really talked to the employee base on, would this fit you? Would you have usage for this? And when we're engaged with an organization, we love to keep the communication open on multiple levels: the leadership, the supervisory management group, and even the employee base, because we know with that data set, that gives us an output of, okay, here's how this evolves. Here's how this works in an organization. And then I would just touch on your great comment, Shadon, around um, with the gig economy. How do we keep up with this? It's a tough one as well. I think many employers, particularly in the US, will need to start to accept and embrace how do we work with that. And then if I look at in Asia, I know this from talking to my clients as well as peers of mine that are working in Asia, it's still a struggle for them to accept, for example, the ability to do remote work. They work remotely, but I know in particularly when they started to ask people to come back to the offices, that created a lot of tension in Asia, because people, and it's the same in the US, but I think in particularly Asia, people had started to work on that gig economy and started to do a little bit of some influencing work, a little bit of, consulting work for other places. And now reining in that in and bringing them into the office, they lost a lot of people because people said, well, I'm not going to do that. Now I look for only remote jobs. And I think employers will need to, in Asia, and in the US, to be honest, embrace that. They will need to think about how do we enable people to have this flexibility at work, because having, this binary approach, it is not going to work. And I've seen a lot of tension now in organizations when they try to implement, this type of yes or no approach. Of course, there's hybrid in between, but even that the talent market, you know this better than me, Shadon, will dictate ultimately how organizations evolve, right? Now, organizations try to move towards a hybrid approach, and they even use percentages of, 80, 20, 70, 30, but the talent market will tell you, no, it's 30, 70, the other way, that I'm good work for you.
That's interesting. Like, when I remember when the Googles and the Facebook and the Amazons, like in their early days, right? It was like, try to get people in the office with all these perks. And then suddenly COVID happened and everything changed. Now, as you mentioned, because of the gig economy or due to personal reasons, even with all the perks, it's kind of not working. Now it's the shift that you mentioned is, 70-30 or 80-20 is what is being mandated. But I'm curious to know, like, if I am, let's say I'm planning to start my own tech startup, right? Apart from, let's say, the remote or hybrid work, which seems like it's a given these days, what else should I be considering when I'm looking for talent? Mainly so that, I succeed. And, you know, apart from the, having a multicultural team, geographically distributed teams, what else should I be looking at?
This is a great question, Ashish. I would take a step back and share the first startup. So that's the startup that moved me from, New York to Singapore. I was not the founder of that, but I was one of the early employees of that organization. That organization was a French organization. The name was Arcadin Global Conferencing. That organization was amazing. At that time, this is 2005. I joined in 2005. The company was founded in 2001, probably went live with their product in 2002. They were selling exactly what we're doing today, basically. Well, not podcasting, but remote collaboration. So they were selling video conferencing tools pre-COVID, pre-Zoom. There was no Zoom back then. And they were doing such a fantastic job evangelizing the product of remote work, remote collaboration back then. I will tell you that to this day, that is one of the most unique and special companies that I've seen. They grew rapidly globally. They had offices in basically every country of the world. They had significant revenue growth. They were profitable. It was privately held with different investors in there. And what made this company amazing was, I'll be a bit cliche and say the people, but if I go a bit deeper on that, they paid such particular attention to the core values of the organization. It started with the CEO. He was big on the core values of the organization, using it as a filter of how you bring people in, how you operate, how you promote. And though I've never seen an organization, that organization grew to about 2,000 plus people. Ultimately, that was acquired by the largest telco in the world, NTT, a Japanese company. But they spent so much time on the core values. From an HR standpoint, I loved it, right? Because they were talking the language of people. They were talking the language of people versus operations. And maybe that's even the European side of it, to be honest. I'll be a bit controversial between capitalism, socialism here, but that was such a unique touch that I've never seen yet, even matched to today. I still stay in touch with ex-colleagues, and they all talk about this fantastic experience we all had. Ashish, to answer your question, something that I think we don't talk enough about is how do we make sure these values are alive in an organization beyond what's hanging on the wall, beyond, a hiring pamphlet that says, yeah, we focus on that. The CEO there kept it so simple. He said, we're going to have 4 core values and we're going to live and breathe this and use this. What was so unique there was those core values was who he was as a person too. So again, this also goes from, large and small organization. But if you're building a startup today, I would tell you that you're going to spend so much time on product. And believe me, I know because we do it too. Ultimately, Ashish, the market will dictate what you sell. You think you have an idea of what you're going to sell. The market will tell you what you're going to sell, but how you grow this company and how you keep that company alive, I would stress that it's going to be related to the values of that company, the values of the founders, which ultimately will resonate to the values of the organization, which is what the buyers will ultimately buy.
This sounds like the prologue to an Edgar Schein book. So for the listeners who may not be aware, Edgar Schein is kind of the godfather of organizational theory, and talks about the importance of organizational culture and how it's really the underlying factors that determine the true organizational culture, not the observable characteristics or things like that, but it's really tied to, especially for startups, the core values of the founders, and that what gets reinforced by that leadership that forms that organizational culture. So, super interesting. And I think that that's incredibly important. Neil, what I appreciate about your perspective is while you are the founder of a co-founder of a company, based around the product and things like that, it's almost like you're not letting the technology component obscure the humanity and the human component, and really keeping those things in balance. And I think that that's a great perspective, because people ultimately are what makes everything work. And so I guess I would ask you, is that a fair statement or a fair assessment of your perspective?
Absolutely. And we've been so intentional about that, Shadon. Thank you for asking that question. Um, I see competitors in our space, especially startups that um, rush to automate and put the technology first behind the human side. And we've been so intentional about the fact that we're in the people development business, the fact that we're looking at team effectiveness, we're looking at leadership development. Those are all unique individuals behind that. Every workshop that we do, every engagement that we have with different uh, teams, there are unique individuals behind that. The technology is a platform that helps us streamline how do we work, but we try to make all of those interactions personalized. And I'll be brutally honest. Some investors that we talk to or different business leaders say, "Guys, you're insane. Like, you won't be able to achieve things at a scale if you do everything from a personalized approach or um, looking after every last person that comes on your platform." And I've been lucky enough to work with my current co-founder for so many years where we can read each other's mind, where we'll say, yeah, we'll worry about that later, right? Let's think about the individual behind our technology right now, and what that person wants and is going through. And when we get to a point where it's unbearable, we'll deal with that differently, right? But for now, we having fun. We continue to work with all types of employees from around the world and leaders on a one-on-one basis in some cases. But you know what? That's the unique part of it. Like, I think I'll get bored or tired if I have to work purely with machines. I mean, that's the future. I get it, right? I'm not going to sit here in a cave and tell you, no, it's technology is not happening. It is happening. We use it. I use it every day as well. But I love the human to human interaction. I will take that 9 times out of 10 every day of the week.
So I have to ask you this, because given that approach and that lens and that perspective, I have to imagine that there's some connection to the actual name of your company, Live More.
Yes,
So if you could just talk about that.
absolutely. Um, eh, for many of the maybe viewers that will watch this in my network, they know that when we started the company, we started it with the name Ikigai. And that is the Japanese concept for the reason of being and your purpose in life, basically. Um, so that was really what we wanted to do. And it was, the company was built around that concept for an individual and or employee. It was just a little bit hard for non, I would say Japanese, or people, they would just butcher the name constantly. So we needed to find a name that had a bit more easier tone to it. But Live More fits so perfectly to what we're trying to do, because we want to have people embrace the beauty of life more than, spending hours doing a particular job or machines and things like that. So we're trying to enable everyone to live a fuller life ultimately and live more.
And Neil, in terms of, let's ask you about the stuff that everybody's asking about these days is, how is AI helping you maybe scale or making it easier for you to run your company? Because, for example, I've heard that in HR, you can use AI to generate job profiles. You
Oh, yeah.
can use it to summarize resumes. Like, how is it helping you out?
Yeah, I think Ashish, on all fronts. So in Hawaii, I was supporting an HR team that we implemented AI to help us uh, generate um, some really nice automated responses to candidates. At that point, they were hiring thousands or trying to hire thousands of people. And this is right when I think ChatGPT started to go mainstream. Um, Before that, it was one person on the team, templating, cutting, pasting, and you know what happens with that. There's so many. They sent it to this person, wrong person, and they automated that approach with AI. So it has helped tremendously on that aspect. Um, as an entrepreneur, I can tell you, um, just talking about, for example, communications with clients, or even, um, you know, helping educate. Believe it or not, many different leaders that aren't thinking about AI today uh, think about how to use it. So, as an entrepreneur, I use AI to help with tons of writing for clients. Sometimes some clients will give me um, their perspective on where they're going with their own internal policies. And that would have taken hours sometimes to have to help them sort through that. And that's done in a matter of minutes now. It has also helped with, um, I would say, some of the follow ups that we do with some of our clients has really automated that process as an entrepreneur. From a technology standpoint and I would say the development of our app and our platform, our tech team, I know, uses AI to help us with some of the development of our current features that we have on the app. That's really on the techie side for that group. But it's happened quick, I would say. I mean, it's always been around, but the adoption for AI, I think it's been just really fascinating to see. And I know all of the leaders that I talk to, whether they're in Asia, Europe, or the US, this is really at the top of their mind.
I feel like, Neil, you've talked so much about sort of this human-centered, high-touch approach that you have to working in the world and working with communities and organizations and individuals. I love that, and I relate to that very closely because my approach also is pretty high touch. Um, and I fundamentally believe that that is the way forward. It continues to be the way forward in a lot of circumstances. But one thing I'm curious about is, as you're thinking about like all the ways in which I mean, we touched on this before, like the HR space is changing because of all the factors that are happening in the world, and so the changes in the talent field. Where do you feel like organizations are at in terms of understanding how HR can be, or sorry, how AI can be a co-pilot to what they're trying to achieve as an organization, as opposed to a replacement of talent? And I think this is a concern that a lot of people have. A lot of people also in the HR space, like they're going to get rid of me because they don't need a me when they've got an AI that could do X, Y, and Z. We also know that there's things that AI is good at and there's things that AI is not good at this point, right? So I would love your point of view on like where do you feel like this is all going, in terms of like leaders points of view on where AI really fits in as co-piloting with their talent.
Yeah, my view is that I think ultimately AI, it's no secret, will replace a lot of the administrative, kind of blue collar roles within a department or an organization. Um, and I had the same conversation with um, this organization I told you about in Hawaii, because that organization has been around for a long time, and they have employees that have been there for uh, decades. And those employees are very worried about exactly what you shared, Salima. Personally, what I've always shared with them and others is that this is an opportunity for people and talent to do deeper, meaningful work that the AI necessarily will not be ready to do yet. And I think that is ultimately what happens with kind of AI being a co-pilot in an organization. I think, contrary to what people believe, I think that happens fairly quickly. At- I'm just looking from what's happened in the last, I think, 6 months to a year with AI to where we're going. I think so. Some people and technologists think that this replacement of some of these workers happen later down the line. I think it happens fairly quickly if it isn't happening now. And now is the time, which I stress to many people that are passionate about what they do, to look at adding value and being more, going deeper in the work that you're doing, so that this way you ultimately do more meaningful work for your organization. And yes, AI ultimately does, I would say now, as a co-pilot, 80% of or 70% of that work, but that 30% will remain there, and the others will need to kind of move into deeper roles for the organization.
Yeah. And it seems to me, and I'd love your thoughts on this, is that leaders, managers, VPs, et cetera, will need to have a point of view that that deeper work is required and needed. Because I think that's the kind of also the sort of fundamental tension I think that we're in right now as well, is that when that space opens up, it's like, are we actually investing in our talent to be able to do that work? Are we creating opportunities for people to do that work? And that seems really important.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Um, the catalyst in this whole, I would say, equation here is the leadership and management group of the organizations, because it is on them now to script what is going to be the future roles of their organization with a 70% co-pilot of AI. And it's unfortunate, Salima, but I think today, um, that management group slash leadership group, and this is a blanket statement, so it's not for everyone. Um, Unfortunately, this group sometimes isn't prepared yet to think
Mhm.
about that. And sometimes if you talk to that group, they will tell you, yeah, but I have no time to think about that because I'm already doing the job of
Right.
my workforce who we haven't even replaced yet, or who I'm trying to find. So it's not an easy answer, but it is up to the leadership and management group of these organizations to start to script what the future of work will look like for their organizations, and have this kind of North Star approach, so that this way they're aspiring to going down that path.
You've given us so much to think about. You have broken down HR. And I'm really excited to um, direct people to your organization. Can you tell us a little bit more about this app before we sign off, and
Abs-
and how people can learn more about your company and you?
yeah, absolutely. Well, you can go to our website, livemore, livemore.app. And essentially what we do is we work with organizations on their leadership development, on their team effectiveness. So we work with organizations, we partner with a proven methodology through a assessment called Open Decide. We run assessments for our teams. We look at how effectively they're working, and we come in and we implement different strategies on bringing organizations, their teams, closer and more effective. People can get in touch with me from the website, LinkedIn. Yeah.
Awesome. Dr. Neil Prasad. Wow. I'm blown away. Have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I know our listeners have too. So just really want to thank you for your time with us. And it was really great having you today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shadon. Thank you, Salima. And thank you, Ashish, for an enjoyable conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Dr. Delaveau, Ashish, the master of masters. Let's talk. What is where did you go with this conversation?
What a great session. I think that for to be able to have and benefit from Neil's perspective and just really keeping people at the center and the importance of that, for me, it was incredibly powerful. I think that, and then the second thing, just having his amazing perspective of being in the US and working in Asia and being able to kind of bridge that gap and shift his lens and to walk us through that a bit. I took away so much from this conversation.
What really stood out was some of the actionable items that we got from Neil, right? So one was, he said, have good values within your company right from the start, keep it simple, makes it easier to scale, makes it easier to retain talent. I, you know, I feel like a lot of companies don't really think about that as much. It kind of like grows organically rather than from the ground up. The reason I say that is, I worked at Amazon and other companies which are a little bit more traditional, and you can see the difference having like a set culture as in terms of how the employees approach problems. So I think that was very valuable information for any entrepreneurs out there. And I really also appreciated the candidness when Neil said, "Hey, AI is here. Uh, some people are gonna be impacted. Better to prepare yourself. There is really no escaping this, right?" So I think that's really the takeaway. I feel like everybody watching should also consider. Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Salima?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, what you just said, Ashish, made me also think about his comment earlier too, right? Is around the gig economy, and that relationship between those two things, right? Where, in the past, I think people would have lost jobs. I think there's a generational piece to this too, by the way. Like, I think that people who are younger might be willing to and can adapt quicker because, technological evolution is kind of in the blood, right? I think I'm not going to age myself here, but listen, I'm in my late 40s, and I feel like the conversation I'm having with people who are like my age or older, and I don't think I'm that old, I think I'm pretty young, is different than I'm having with younger generations around, like, what's happening with jobs and, like, the anxiety, right, that people are having about, "If I lose this job, like, what am I gonna do with myself?" Right? Whereas I feel like younger generations like, "Sure, I'm just gonna go get another job," or, "I'm gonna, like, rely on my gig, the 3 gigs I have," right? I mean, but I also feel like, it's a very interesting and strange time for folks where it's like this whole side gig thing is, I think, really interesting, and I think it makes a lot of sense. In fact, I heard, what's his name? Is it John Maeda from Microsoft? Is that his first name? Oh my gosh, completely butchered this, but, um, I think I saw him and some other, like, very senior leaders, all both happen to be from Microsoft, talking about how now people have to think about their careers as a matrix as opposed to, like, one thing, right? All the pieces of the puzzle that are gonna allow you to have income and kinda live the life that you wanna live. And so I think it's a really interesting moment for younger generations where I think maybe some of that comes more naturally, harder for older generations. And so I really appreciate Neil's point of view that we have to keep centering people, right? Because that means strategies are going to have to change, right? You can't have a blanket strategy across an organization if you're going to be hiring cross generationally, as an example, right? Because it could mean different things for different people. So I really appreciated his very human-centered approach and people-centered approach, um, to what they're doing, and then his app also being centered around that, right? Like, recentering people through technology, and I thought that that was it's really insightful and important as the whole HR world is evolving, is gonna get pushed against. I just saw I think you might have seen that, like, Shrim, what I don't know, I don't even know how to pronounce the acronym, but the
Sure,
HR
sure,
Sure, thank
sure.
you. I always say shrim, and I know that's not right. Um, they cut the equity out of the D and the I, the DEI, and so this is causing all kinds of but I think it's, again, a reflection of how, social environments are evolving, and people are not just saying, "Okay, great, shroom for doing that." I think people have a point of view on what HR needs to be caring about. I don't know.
Yeah. And I'm curious. I mean, I really wanted to ask Neil about this, where, we talked about the gig economy, right? And like, sometimes I feel, does that exist for a reason, right? And when I say reason, I mean, let me give you an example. So back in India, when I started my job in 2006, like that was my first job, the starting salary was like 2 lakhs per year, 2 lakh rupees, right? And fast forward to 2024, the starting salary is 3 lakhs per year. So, is that forcing people to
Mm.
like still consider,
Mm,
more taking on more jobs because, the inflation in India was close to like 12% at one point, right? So, so the salaries have not caught up, and it is the it is always in discussion here, right? Where the U.S. job market says, if you look at it, like people in the 60s, 70s had a good starting salary, and really it has been unchanged for the past 3 decades.
Yeah, I think to your point, Ashish, when you look at a few factors, one, just wage stagnation over the past however long. Two, and Salima, you talked about this. I think part of the reason that the younger generations are a bit more comfortable with this gig economy, it's not just age, but it's also you have to take into account when they were born, right? Because for them, a lot of them were
yeah.
born during these periods of great economic upheaval. So whether it was, the bust from real estate markets and
Yeah.
all of those things. So some of the promises that older generations were able to expect from corporations and companies didn't apply to these younger generations of people. They never had that level of economic certainty from any one company or place. And so in some ways they've really been forced to create almost a patchwork or a quilt of economic opportunity for themselves. And then I feel that technology has really enabled that.
Mhm.
And so I think the intersection of technology, wage stagnation, as well as economic upheaval have really come together to create this almost this trifecta of reasons that this generation, these younger generations are more comfortable with finding resources and revenue in multiple ways.
Yeah. I think that's an excellent point, and I just wanted to pivot to one more thing. I know we're almost at time, but I wanted to kind of take up this idea or the reality that AI and the co-piloting of AI with HR. I think that that's really interesting, and one thing that I'm concerned about, and he kind of confirmed and affirmed, is this idea that, um, you know, really, like, as companies take on more technology, AI, other whatever it might be, at this point it's AI, as replacing jobs or skills or whatever it might be, how much time and effort is really being paid attention to, like, what the organization needs going forward, like, how we're gonna support talent through that. Where do we need the AI and where do we need other things? And are we gonna open up space for other kinds of work, right? That never got we never got to, right? But sometimes we don't get to it because leaders don't think it's that important, but employees are like, "No, no, we really need to be focusing on this," right? It may not be a priority for you, but actually it's actually really important. So I know that's something that I kind of worry about is, as we make this change and transition with AI, how much time and effort are leaders really spending on thinking about, like, the talent mapping and the sort of skill mapping that they're gonna have to do.
Yeah, we'll see. I think it's one of the just the biggest opportunities, and it's I feel like it's been in organizational challenges for a very long time. How do you continue to center developing your people in the best way possible,
Yeah.
empowering them to be, just successful and things like that, and do organizations have kind of that will to make that a priority? So,
Well, on that note, we'll see everyone next time. And thank you again, Shadan and Ashish. Amazing as
absolutely.
always.
Yep. Thanks all.
Thanks.